Over the past several years, leading authorities in the fields of sociology, psychology, education, and religion have examined, visited, and conducted live-in studies of the Christian missionary communities known as the family. Their observations address some of the most controversial accusations leveled against the family and other new religious movements. The participants in this video received no financial remuneration for their appearances. The producers wish to thank them for voluntarily contributing their time and comments. What is your overall impression of the family?
Overall, it's very much like mainstream Christianity. Doctrinally, it's evangelical Pentecostal. Has a few ideas that set it apart. One, it tends to live communally. While that's a part of the mainstream in terms of Catholic sisters and brothers and the like, it's not been very common to Protestant Christianity, and it does kind of stick out. Secondly, they have a very positive view of sexuality. This is something that mainstream, particularly liberal Protestants, articulate but rarely act upon. And the family has been the one group that we know of that doctrinally fit into mainstream Christianity that's tried to act upon its ideas of positive sexuality. Ideas that have gotten them in trouble at various times and places. The other thing that differentiates them from mainstream Christianity is the apocalypticism, understanding that we are living in the last days and acting upon that understanding. It's not just lip service to the idea, but a real belief that these are the last days and something cataclysmic is about to happen.
I think the group has well named itself the family. I know they were called the Children of God. But from what my experience is they have a tremendous gift of community. They have what groups everywhere are trying to accomplish, which is getting along with each other. And achieving that level of community has been my interest and my joy of my interaction with this group. I personally am not interested in what their religion is, to tell you the truth. I'm interested in the community and how they've actualized living together so wholesomely all over the world.
I would say it's a collection of a wide range of individuals. We've been impressed with the tremendous diversity that we've witnessed within the two different families that we've had contact with. But there are individuals who quite obviously consider themselves part of a family unit in a very real way. Now, any number of organizations like to appropriate that term, family. We're family, and so on, and yet oftentimes that's really more lip service than reality. But here there is a genuine sense that people are involved in a very large, extended, but loving and caring family.
The family has gone through some stages which have led to a lot of criticism. Their sexual openness, which in a sense mirrored a sexual openness in society, for many people wasn't acceptable, for example, in a religious group. And they seem to now have come to terms with that past, to be open about it, to have regulated what goes on within their group in a way which doesn't make it so difficult for those outside to understand what's going on. And I think the family can be understood in terms of a very honest, missionary wish to see that the name of Jesus in everybody's hearts, and that many of their activities should be seen in this light. Their desire to witness is not a desire to get more converts, but to see Jesus in people's hearts.
It converts and affects many, many more people than ever join it. Most of the people who are affected by it join older churches. Those people who join it are very committed to its own goals and movement, the style of life, the evangelism, the communal living, the mission. So I think there's no doubt that it will go on and continue. There's no doubt in my mind that it's a new denomination as well.
The family actualizes what all of us in family units are trying to accomplish, which is the understanding and the tolerance and the unity. The unity. I mean, this is what the United States is based on, is unity and family and wholesomeness, and it's nice to see it actualized. More than nice. I mean, it is, it's a way of life that works, and I believe strongly in what the family is about, based on results. I'm very much of a believer in results. We can have all kinds of ideas and theories, but you show me the results. Does it work or does it not work? And I feel that the strongest responsibility the family has right now is to teach, to put out what works, how they do it, and to share that with the world. And I wish that they weren't persecuted right now so they can have the time to do that.
Why are new religious movements, including the family, being attacked?
We've experienced a radical shift in religious pluralism in this country in just 25, 30 years. Conservative forces have not liked that shift and the changes that it has brought, and what they see is a certain lessening of controls within the society, and have tended to demonize what they see as the forces that have created that change. The most effective form of that demonization has taken in the religious realm has been the labeling of a set of groups as cults, and of turning the word cult, which is a perfectly good old sociological term, into a term of derision and very, very negative.
In this society, we have a, a certain belief that we're very open to all sorts of religions, and as a matter of fact, we view people who differ as being rather strange, and why don't they conform, and that we exert all these pressures on them to conform. And you know, if you look at the history of this country, there's a long history of intolerance. There was a large anti-Catholic movement at the beginning of the 19th century. The Mormons were hounded across the country and chased out in the middle of the desert. And you know, then we still wouldn't leave them alone. Sent an army out there. So it's there. What's happening is not unusual. It just seems so when we contrast it with our ideals.
There is a trend in our country today to attack religion, and it's unconstitutional. Our country is based upon concepts of religious freedom, religious tolerance, but modernly there are those who feel that because people believe a certain way, that they're going to react and act upon those beliefs to the extent that it's harmful to society. But really, it's what they're talking about. What they're really doing is attacking the belief system. They're not attacking the conduct. They're saying that the conduct justifies the government intrusion, but whereas in fact the conduct is contrived, it's fabricated, and they're using this fabricated, contrived conduct to justify an investigation of the belief system.
I believe that a lot of groups today are target for the fears that are no longer pointed to the communism and the larger fears. Now these fears have to go somewhere. These fears have not been allayed, and so I think society as a whole are looking for someplace the bad guy to show up, and this is my opinion is why these groups are being picked on. In addition to that, in addition to just a sociological area of need for fears to be put someplace, there is also anti-cult groups that specialize in selling fear, and marketing the fear also gets a good deal of income for keeping those groups in business. And this is what I believe has been the source of the problems as the family and other groups have been experiencing.
They fail to recognize that today's new religious movement may be tomorrow's accepted religion. And this is true throughout history. Many of the new religious movements of history, if one takes here in Britain, for example, in the last 200 years, the two outstanding examples of the Methodist Church and the Salvation Army, both of those groups were widely persecuted in their early days and were accused of many of the things that new religious movements are now accused of.
Once we become intolerant, we're leading ourselves into all kinds of traps. Where do you stop? Once you begin to say a new religious movement must be banned, then do I advocate that the Roman Catholic Church should be banned once again, as it was for several hundred years in England? Do I advocate, any number of religious persuasions should be, quote, banned? It's a very dangerous track to go on.
People in free societies should be able to form what associations they choose to form. It would be crazy, in my judgment, to create laws prohibiting a particular class of associations, because particularly in this case, to try to define what a new religion is, and of course these people who are trying to draw up these kinds of laws are having great trouble trying to define what they mean by a new religion, which they would then proscribe. But I think this is a fruitless exercise, and I think it fundamentally is in violation of the kinds of civil rights that we ought to be taking for granted within Western society.
Look, you've got to wonder whether or not there is some concerted effort afoot, because I've had some knowledge of the cases brought against the family in London and in Barcelona, in Sydney and in Melbourne, and more recently in Buenos Aires. And what I see is a small number of affidavits that keep appearing in common from case to case. So what does appear to be happening is that there are a group of people who appear to be shifting from place to place around the world. And I am now persuaded that in a number of situations there are people who are actually generating and initiating these attacks in various places and arriving and feeding information to the police, the various community services bodies in these countries, and giving them some reason to be alarmed at the life of the family and applying pressure. Now, some of these people, I think, act as individuals. Some of them are sponsored and supported by a number of anti-cult organisations.
There has emerged in the last 20 years a almost professional category of anti-cult people, many of whom perhaps have not had any of their own relatives or family members involved, but simply for any number of personal motives, and not all of these motives, I think, are worthy motives, have come into this activity. And so my impression is it's the professional anti-cult organizations like CAN, the Cult Awareness Network, so-called, that seem to be systematically creating the most problem.
What is the anti-cult movement?
The anti-cult movement is an alliance of different specialized interests. Kind of the two wings of it are the deprogrammers, who are independent entrepreneurs who are kidnapping people for money, and but they couldn't operate if it were not for certain formal organizations that portray themselves as cult watchdog groups, like the Cult Awareness Network and the American Family Foundation. And the Cult Awareness Network, American Family Foundation, they say, well, we have nothing to do with deprogrammers. But that turns out to be a lie, as many people have found out. And what's really happening with those groups is that instead of being kind of neutral consumer advocate groups, which is how they try to come across, as a matter of fact, they are always propagating the most negative image of alternative religions, rather than trying to propagate something balanced, and that's because they work hand in glove with deprogrammers.
Why aren't they out there firsthand, getting firsthand information, rather than going on prejudice and then selling that? And it's ignorance that they're selling.
Anti-cult movements arise, of course, in response to what they see as a threat, and they become a type of religious vigilante, if one can put it like that. They see it as their business to stimulate government to do things which they think government should do anyway. The ultimate position for the anti-cultist is, of course, a totalitarian state in which official values are disseminated and no other. Anti-cultists, when they are simply a group expressing concern about what happens, say, to young people who may be converted, are probably a legitimate expression of public opinion in the way that a cult is a legitimate expression of public opinion. When they become active vigilantes, then, of course, one may be faced with quite a different situation. And in some respects, anti-cultists become cultists in their own right, being focused on the negative side of cultism rather than on the positive.
These people developed a new definition, new terminology for the word cult, and it includes just about any kind of religious group that you can name. I mean, any kind. And a number of them who are not religious, like Amway and Snap-on Tools and people like that. That's, you know, and they're on their cult list too. So, you know, how can you say, you know, even utilize their wording that these are cults, because they're not. But they definitely are anti. They definitely are a movement. And for the most part, 80% or better of their activities are against religions, all kinds of religions, including the Catholic Church.
The one success the anti-cult movement really has had is to to create the image of a sinister group of manipulative people running these new religious groups we really don't know anything about.
Would you say that that image is a correct one?
Not as far as I've been able to obtain. Certainly the new religions are bringing change to society. Certainly the leadership of the new religions are not made up of saints and perfect people. They make mistakes, and certainly new religious groups have made mistakes. But I've found nothing in the new religions that set them apart as being more particularly prone to evil or to bad things than the old religions are.
My experience of the anti-cult kind of people goes back well into the 1970s, and there were some pretty, well, frankly, pretty poisonous people around running this anti-cult kind of campaign. And in my judgment, they were almost as unpleasant as the kind of people they were portraying as being bad or a bad influence.
Cult Awareness Network seems to have the ear of law enforcement and governmental officials. I believe that the incident in Waco, Texas is a good example of a government giving credibility to the CAN people when in essence they shouldn't have, and we all know what the tragedy and the disaster that occurred as a result of that. But my experience has been that government officials and law enforcement officials seem to take what the CAN people say as true, and they act on that, and I think that's wrong. I think that you know, the information should be verified, corroborated. There should be an independent investigation before the government just blindly and solely reacts to the allegations of the CAN people.
Over 90% of people who leave new religious movements report that their experience has been a positive one. Why do some become detractors?
Those members who are in a movement who have left home or abandoned friendship or workplace or school or whatever it may be to join a movement are of course themselves very much under pressure from their former associates to renounce the beliefs they've now acquired. In doing so, of course, the friends or former friends of the individual put a great deal of pressure on them to relinquish what they have accepted. If they do relinquish those new beliefs, then of course they have a difficult situation to face. They have to explain themselves in some way why they joined the movement in the first place, and of course why they've left it. The obvious thing for the apostate to do is to indicate that he wasn't wholly responsible, or he was in some way approached at a time when he was particularly vulnerable, or that people manipulated him, or that he was coerced in some way or another. So that it's quite understandable that apostates, people who leave new movements, should reinterpret their experience in an entirely diametrically opposed way to the one which they would have used when they joined. That is to say, they reverse their beliefs totally, abandon them, and pin blame on someone else for what has happened. This is the only way, in the sense that they can rehabilitate themselves with their former friends. So that apostate atrocity stories are common currency in the world of new religions.
Wherever you have people who have committed themselves wholeheartedly to a cause, and then for whatever reason become disillusioned or disenchanted with that, it creates a tremendous sense of anger that can then be, I think, it becomes a negative energy that can distort a situation. It's like when you're mad at someone, to get back, I think there is a tendency to paint a far worse picture than the facts would warrant.
There's a slight lack of integrity when you look for your answers from other people. And I think that when you don't find answers from other people, you tend to blame them rather than blame yourself. Maybe they're people of little faith. Maybe they're people who are disappointed in what they found. Maybe the life inside the family was too hard. I don't know, but I haven't seen any credible person yet stand up in the public eye and say, this happened to me and this is what's wrong.
I think sometimes there's just a natural tendency when one is angry and has reversed their own position and maybe made to feel like if I don't somehow fully renounce my previous commitments, it'll make me look foolish or taken in or something like that. I think there's a natural a tendency simply to embellish, to distort, to make things up.
If for one reason or another you leave a group such as that, you have got to ask yourself the question psychologically, what have I been doing with the last 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 years of my life? And if you have come to the point of thinking that the group is not the be-all and end-all, that it doesn't have all the answers, then psychologically you have got to justify the fact that you spent that time of your life in it. And people do that in different ways. Some people will say, I was brainwashed. Some people will say, I was misled. Some people will say, it was just a passing phase, I'm more mature now. And I think that's a natural reaction. It avoids the question of personal failure. It avoids the question of, is it possible that the group was right or partly right and that I was wrong to leave it? But I have to say again that there are some people I've met who approach this thing in a very mature way and who are able to see that although they have now left the group, they did gain something from it while they were in.
Quite a lot of research has shown that ex-members who leave on their own accord and don't have contact with the anti-cult movement have a much more balanced view of the movement they've left. They see that there were some pros, some cons in being a member, and they understand it as a whole. Those who leave and tend to have a contact with the anti-cult movement very often take on the idea that they have been brainwashed and develop an angry, negative attitude towards the movement that they've been a member of.
What is deprogramming?
Deprogramming refers to techniques. They're supposed to reverse the programming. In a very popular book, a best-selling book of, I guess it dates back to the late 70s, called Snapping. The authors of that book propagated the theory, which is totally unsubstantiated. I mean, it was a fantasy, figment of their imagination. But they generated a theory that so-called cults, by by weakening their subjects, by weakening them, by fatiguing them, by poor diet, pouring information in over and over and over again, at some point in the brain, physically, something snaps, and they're all of a sudden programmed. So deprogrammers are people who unsnap the snap, theoretically, and they claim to do this by, well, first of all, they have to kidnap the member, because the member, theoretically, is so programmed that they won't come on their own. Now, despite the fact, I just want to mention that despite the fact that there's copious research on new religious movements showing that, in fact, most new religious movements have a very high turnover rate.
This is, by anybody's definition, kidnapping, and therefore is illegal, a crime. And yet many of these deprogrammers, even though they have done so, still are able to bring expert witnesses and whatever into court to prove that the movement from which somebody has been kidnapped has actually been in violation of the law. The social climate in many situations is such that what I would consider to be criminal activity is sanctioned and even approved of by the courts. We have a long and very urgent educational process that needs to go on here.
Deprogramming, from my experience of it and my judgment about it, is a very pernicious kind of interference with the conscience and with the decisions of people. It is painted in such ways that, of course, the allegation is that these people have already been, in some ways, programmed or brainwashed, or whatever expression is used. And then there is a task to undo that. But the undoing can be much more malicious and much more damaging and much more hurtful than anything else. I think people need to be allowed to have an open conscience about what they want to believe and what they want to commit themselves to.
I was watching a couple of days ago a rerun of a Phil Donahue show, and on that show there were representatives from a fundamentalist Christian group, Mormons, and Hasidic Jews, and the so-called cult consultant, Rick Ross, was presented on that. Rick Ross happens to be very well known as a deprogrammer. Rick Ross was someone who works very closely. He's a member of Cult Awareness Network. He was probably involved a lot in giving advice in the Waco fiasco. And despite Phil Donahue's erudition and his learnedness with regard to many things, at no point during the show did either he or anyone in the audience ask Rick Ross what his qualifications were. They simply accepted him as a cult consultant, you know, as if you can go down to your local community college and take a little course in cult consultants. The truth is, Rick Ross is a thug. He's an ex-con. He's a con artist. He's a thief. He's someone who has no particular credentials at all for doing any of this, but he sells himself as this, and he charges big bucks. Deprogrammers charge very big bucks. They make a lot of money.
My personal opinion is that deprogramming is immoral, illegal, and has very negative results. I think that the people who go in for it, a few of them may have good motives, but very often they are trying to work out something that is in themselves, and they certainly are getting a lot of money. There are vast sums of money exchanged in this, and they have a vested financial interest.
Deprogrammers typically pull down $500,000 take-home every year over and above expenses. We've seen Ted Patrick's tax returns last few years, and he didn't have a year that he didn't pull down a little over $400,000. And this is a 9th grade dropout. I mean, you know, he doesn't do too bad, you know, without an education.
They will produce literature, show videos, and various other means in order to try to persuade the person that the group they belong to is a fake, is wrong, is evil, misinterprets the Bible, that the leader is amassing a whole lot of money, exploiting his or her members, and all the bad things. And this will go on possibly with threats of the person being kept there until they renounce their faith. Sometimes the person may be told that he or she will be certified as insane and locked up in a mental hospital, and indeed some people have been put in mental hospitals and received physical treatment, drugs, medication. And this will go on until either the person says, okay, I give in, I won't be a member any longer, or manages to escape. And there have been various hair-raising stories about people jumping out of windows and dashing off with broken legs and things like that.
I get absolutely upset. I get absolutely aggravated. I mean to tell you that I want to see this stopped. I cannot conceive of someone actually kidnapping another adult person and for any amount of money and trying to wrestle their individually freely chosen beliefs from them. I think that is an anathema. I mean, I just get so, and this torture and the things that they are put through. I mean, Ginger Brown in San Diego came out of her 5 days of deprogramming by escaping, by jumping out of the van when they were transporting her to a different location, running into a bar, screaming her bloody head off, and this bar owner, was thankfully picked up a shotgun from under the counter and chased them off and called the police. The girl went to the police station, stayed in the police station, where they photographed and recorded over 200 bruises on her body. I mean, we had a guy that Ted Patrick had deprogrammed that slashed his back with a razor blade, with a straight razor. I mean, we have a guy, Bill Eilers in Michigan, who had his arm broken when they were manhandling and roughhousing him. And these are not just isolated cases. I had an interview with one deprogramming victim. She was kidnapped 3 times, and last time they held her for 82 days. Folks, that's 3 months. Held in a room no bigger than this for 90 days. 82 days. It's incredible. I can't believe that in a society that we allow that. But yet it goes on approximately 1,000 times every year in this country alone. Not counting other countries around the world. Japan right now is experiencing 3 times the deprogrammings that we are. 3,000 or 4,000 a year in Japan going on right now. All of them coordinated by the Cult Awareness Network, American Family Foundation, and their allies. This is an international network. This is big business.
The charge of brainwashing and mind control has been leveled against the family and other new religious movements. Is there any basis to this claim?
There is a very famous case of Margaret Singer, who's a prominent architect of the theory of brainwashing, mind control by cults. And her theories were explicitly rejected by the American Psychological Association. And part of the upshot of that was to say that the APA did not recognize brainwashing outside of a context where someone was being held against their will. So, no, I don't believe that anybody is brainwashed unless they're held against their will, as they might be during a deprogramming session.
Both the American government and to a lesser extent the Canadian government sank millions, if not billions of dollars into research grants for psychologists. When I was in graduate school, it was a very hot area. In fact, I did my master's thesis on this, trying to explore ways of figuring out how to brainwash somebody. How had the commies done it? So after hundreds of studies, millions or billions of dollars on it, the conclusion by the American Psychological Association and by all researchers in the area is we've never been able to demonstrate it. It's a fiction. To some extent, if you have people under physical captivity, such as in a hostage situation, you have control over their food, you can torture them, so on and so forth. You can get people to say things that are contrary to their values. And once you can get people in that situation to say things, sometimes people change their values. But that's the only situation. And that really doesn't exist very commonly in most of our lives. So it's not even really a matter of opinion. No one who is familiar with the research, no respectable psychologist who's familiar with the research, psychiatrist or anyone in the mental health field would make the slightest claim that new religious movements brainwash or program people, simply because no one can do that. It can't be done.
I personally am not very impressed by the sorts of people who appear in court and say that mind control goes on and they're experts, because they have almost inevitably not watched the process. They, perhaps the new religions wouldn't let them in because they are seen as enemies, so it could be difficult for them once they've come out as seeing that this happens. But they tend only to have talked to ex-members or parents, and to have a very biased sample. It's rather like getting a marriage guidance counsellor who sees people who want to have divorce talking about what marriage is like.
You understand that although any psychologists who are researchers in this area who heard what I just said about brainwashing, any of them would find it a non-controversial statement. They would all know that's true. when you go before a jury or a judge, when you go into a court of law, to those people, it appears to be one person's word against another person's word. So you've got a Margaret Singer saying they're programmed, mind control, and then you may have someone else who really knows the literature saying that's not true, and juries and judges have to sort that out. But that's a major dilemma that you face in trials. But no respectable scientist would say that. But I think that her reasons are probably not very deep. They're probably the reasons that anyone would imagine why someone would generate a fiction and propagate a fiction.
It makes good sound bites. It sounds good. It sounds good to the concerned parents who say, "Geesh, my young daughter grew up in a family here. She's our youngest daughter, and she seemed very cool and calm and level-headed. And she goes off to college, and all of a sudden she got mixed up in this religion and turned away from the religion that she grew up in Sunday school with. She must be brainwashed. I mean, there's no other reason." Then you talk to the daughter and say, "My mother's been trying to control my life for 18 years, and I'm sick and tired of it, and she's not going to do it anymore." Say, "Oh, well, that's not what I heard from her." Well, she doesn't think she controls me, but she does. And you hear that from every single one of them. Every one of them. They don't know how to let go.
Are the members of the family, both adults and children, able to freely think for themselves?
Very much so, and they do so. I've seen evidence of this over and over again. When I move in to visit with groups, I have a certain routine of questions that I will tend to go through to check on, see how people are aware of what's going on in the world, how much do they pay attention to sports or to movies or to various kinds of mass cultural activity, and how tuned they are to different kinds of currents. Are they aware of the headline news from the last week, those kinds of things. I've always found the family, while not interested in many of the things I'm interested in, to always at least be aware of what's going on. When we were in Budapest, for example, every evening the family gathered to watch an hour CNN news, just to keep up with the world and what was happening. And were far more alert as to what was going on in the world than many of the members of my own church.
Our experience has been anything but any evidence of individuals who are being controlled or are at least fearful of expressing an individual opinion or of demonstrating creative kinds of responses to ordinary everyday life problems. To the contrary, we see a lot of healthy expressions of individualism. We see a lot of creative responses being made. We see children who are being asked to think about a situation, to make judgments, and to be responsible for judgments. This is something that's always important to me as both a social scientist and as a parent of children, is the degree to which young people are encouraged to make decisions, but then are encouraged also to understand that they're responsible for those decisions that they make. And this is something that we've seen time after time here in the family, that young people are not only given positions of responsibility where they must make decisions that affect everybody in the family, including adults, but that these decisions are respected by adults.
They're taught some very strong values, but equally as importantly, they're also taught to think for themselves. Certainly not one of the hallmarks of brainwashing or programming. They're very independent-minded. They're able to, one of the things that is very important is they are able to apply their values to diverse new types of situations and stimulus material, really, that they haven't confronted before. And that shows a real flexibility of of thinking. So they're spontaneous, and they are free thinkers.
I think this term brainwashing or mind controlled is totally inapplicable, unsuitable to talk about the children in the family. It's a word that's badly misused. The children in the family obviously are influenced by what goes on in the family, just as any children are in any other family. All parents try to guide their children in terms of their values, in terms of their goals, in terms of development, in terms of the kind of ideas that they maintain. I don't think that the parents of those children in the family are in any way brainwashing their children. This is a word that has been taken up or used rather by an anti-cult movement who don't like to see those involved in a new religious movement as having a wish to be, the people involved as having a wish to be there of their own. It seems to me that the people who are involved in these groups, and in the family in particular, are very much aware of what they want, and they have a wish to be there. The figures showing that people leave implies that there's no problem about leaving if people wish to. There are children, I've met children in the family who know others who have left. There has been no problem about them leaving. In fact, they've been given provision with other families to go and test it out to see whether they actually wanted to leave. They've been very careful helping mechanisms, if you like, within the family so that children can try and work out what they want best for themselves, whether the family life is the right one for them. I think they're very pragmatic about the fact that a missionary life might not be the best for every child. It's a very hard life, not one that everybody would want to pursue. And they're quite realistic about the fact that some children may not want this for themselves. I think there's quite a bit of counselling when children do have ideas about leaving. And obviously they're going to talk to them, perhaps try and persuade them that it might not be the right thing for them to leave. But it seems if they do want to leave, they are allowed to leave. And I don't think, if that's the situation, you can use the word brainwashing.
Anti-cult groups accuse the new religious movements of child abuse. In your study of the family, have you found any evidence of this?
Interacting with their young adults, people who've been raised in the family, I found them to be quite pleasant. I didn't see any evidence of any kind of like weirdness or pathology, as you would see in someone who had been sexually abused as a child. And then I also arranged for a child psychologist to actually go and spend time with the family. And it was someone who I trusted his judgment very much, Larry Lilliston. And when Professor Lilliston, you know, I mean, I didn't anticipate, by the time Larry spent time with the family, I had already felt like that there was no child abuse. But, you know, just hearing him confirm that was good.
I came here feeling that I had a great responsibility. I came as a scientist, but I felt I had a responsibility to society and also to the children here, that if they were being mistreated, to be able to discover that. So I give that as a background. I didn't come with negative expectations, but I really tried to be objective. Having said that, with regard to the question of abuse, I have, in addition to the observations I've made here, I've conducted assessment of children in this home here. I've conducted psychological assessments, including assessments, the same kinds of assessments that I would do as court-ordered assessments in divorce custody cases or in other abuse cases. And there is absolutely no evidence of abuse for abuse of children here, either physical abuse or sexual abuse. The kinds of signs that one would look for, without going into all the details, but the kinds of signs that one would look for with children who have been abused simply are absent. from these children. That sounds like a negative statement. Let me make it more positive than that. Not only isn't there any evidence for abuse of these children here, but in fact they are they provide strong evidence of bright, happy, generally speaking, happy, healthy, well-adjusted children.
When you surround kids with an environment of love, when you are there for them, when you have an extended family, which is essentially what you have in the family, you've done something which hasn't really been practiced on a large scale, not in this country, for almost, 150, 200 years, and that is we have the extended family in operation once again. And really, if you look at our society, if there is abuse, a lot of it stems from the fact that we have not only done away with the extended family, where people used to all live basically in the same farming community, and kids could have ready access to their grandma, their grandpa, their aunts, their uncles, their older siblings, and essentially always had someone there to support them, to teach them, to help them along. This is all gone now. In fact, you don't even have your real parents anymore, and most kids are being raised in institutions. And then people wonder why we have gangs, why we have violence, why we have drugs, why we have disrespect for the law. I believe that a lot of this is because our society as a whole has not done what the family is doing, and that is raising children in a whole environment where people are there to support them, to lead them by example. And I think this is what this is almost the best way to prevent any kind of abuse.
I have travelled fairly extensively, I guess, around family homes. I visited a number of them, and I've become very well acquainted with the life of the family in various homes in Australia. And it's my view that that there is no evidence of sexual abuse of the children. I see none of the signs. I see no evidence of it in any way. And it is significant that those who search for that evidence, and it's now occurred in Australia, in France, in Spain, in the Argentine, and in other places, no one has been able to find that sort of evidence. And that's consistent, in my mind, with what I observe of the family's life.
I've found that children have very little luck when it comes to adults, when it comes to telling lies. These children were very closely examined by experts. The Department of Community Services brought all their resources to bear on analysing these children. But throughout it all, they never came up with any evidence. These children aren't molested. You can't sit a child in front of me that I can ask questions of that can get around me and pretend it hasn't been molested if it hasn't been, or pretend it has if it hasn't. Children generally are honest. You can't get 65 children with genius IQs who are able to resist all psychological forms of oppression to get the truth from them. The children told the truth. There was nothing of much concern, and eventually the government relented to them, but let the children go back home.
One thing we have to remember when we're talking about the child protection system is that it is the children who suffer the most from misuse of power, from abuse of power. Children who are falsely removed or falsely or unnecessarily interrogated, and interrogated with such insensitivity, without parental knowledge or consent. These children are being abused by the state.
I wouldn't say the children in the family were in any danger. The community life, I would say, is probably a positive aspect for those children. They get a great deal from each other, from peers, from the number of adults that are around. And in fact, I've heard many TERF supporters, people who were members, wish that they still had that kind of solidarity for their children. So I would say, no, not dangerous, the opposite, a very positive influence for most of those children.
What do you think about the family's education of their children?
So what I've seen here and in England was a tremendous curriculum of education, and not isolated either. Seems to be questions brought up as I'm hearing that the family has, they're not socialized, the children aren't socialized. That is not what I saw at all. They're very, very sociable. They're socialized in the world at large, probably more so than the average school child. I mean, absolutely more so.
They make full provision with excellent books, often using books provided by Education Otherwise, and using computers, often taking material from the United States, put together in a very successful way. I've seen the children working on projects and enjoying doing those projects in an intelligent, investigative way, in a way that I think teachers from other schools would be proud of.
They have brought in outside educators to independently test the children to assure that their homeschooling is successful and up to par. And it's been, I've been advised that, the results that come back are that the children who are being homeschooled in the family actually excel national standards in education and expectations. So I think that that speaks for itself.
The people who are raised in the family, I don't feel like when I converse with them that they've been lacking in their education in any way. I mean, I feel like I'm talking with people who have, you know, as far as their knowledge, have been through college.
The family has been accused of sheltering their children to the point that they are not properly socialized. What has been your observation?
I just would like to hear who's saying that and where they're getting their information. I have never heard anybody say that. And I would challenge fiercely anybody who did. I have had a couple of months' experience getting to know the family here in Washington, D.C., and I would say just the opposite. I'm real impressed with the kids particularly. They strike me as being among the most emotionally well-grounded of any group of young people I've ever been around.
I think people who make that kind of attack need to be sure of what they're saying, because Islamic families, I think, are very strict about wanting to bring their children up within a very clear framework of Islamic culture and Islamic studies and Islamic ways of doing things. Jewish children equally, if you're in a very strict Orthodox Jewish situation. So that any religious movement wishes to have that degree of privatization about their religion is not unusual. For goodness sakes, it happened. Roman Catholics in Australia, the whole Roman Catholic Church in Australia, hugely committed to maintaining a Roman Catholic church school system separate from the state school system, in order that Roman Catholic children were brought up by brothers and sisters, Roman Catholic sisters and brothers, who really controlled the whole educational pattern right up to the time of 16, 18 years of age. And then we're arguing for Roman Catholic University as well, seeing that the whole education process should be contained within that system. Now that's a phenomenon that's known in the United States, in Canada, in Australia. It's a widespread phenomenon. Why shouldn't a small sect do the same thing?
Most people would believe that children that are reared in a very strong value system, very clear-cut, very strongly internalized, that those children, when they're removed from the situation in which they're raised, have a more to another situation where that value system does not, you know, is not as strongly felt, that they have trouble adjusting to the outside world. That's the erroneous assumption. In fact, most people aren't aware of this, but there's been quite a bit of research done by child psychologists, specifically the Israeli child psychologist Reuven Feuerstein, that shows that children who are reared in situations where there's strong values, as long as the values are presented in a loving, caring, within a loving, caring context, that those children are more adaptable and more flexible when they get into new situations, even if the new situation is very much different from the value system in which they're raised.
We're not talking about something unhealthy. We're really talking about something that is very good. Children thrive in a structured environment. They really do. And then as they get older, they can take those values, and as they've been incorporated into their very being, as they've been socialized and as they've absorbed this, then you don't have to have the structure there. It's already within them. They've been insulated. And then they can survive in this idiotic world that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And that's not what's going on with most kids today, unfortunately. They don't have the basic kind of insulation to feel good about themselves, to feel positive about themselves. And I think we would all do well to observe how the family does care for their children. We could probably learn a lot.
It does seem to me that children who go out and meet other children, as the children do in the family when they go out witnessing, obviously pick up an awful lot about what's going on in the other outside culture, outside ideas, and they very clearly have ideas about this. They are very bright, and they think about what's going on outside, so they're certainly not closeted.
These are not rigid little automatons who don't know how to have a good time. I'm always on the look for a sense of humor, and these are children who laugh and make jokes and clearly enjoy play. And in fact, I think there's a real element of play in a lot of the missionary outreach program. The entertainment emphasis allows children to have a good time while they are making a serious contribution and have a sense that what we're doing is important, but what we're doing is also a lot of fun, and that clearly is manifest in the way they carry themselves.
In closing, what is your general opinion of the members, including the teens and children, of the family?
I think the children in this particular environment are happy. When I observed them, I was actually quite envious, because I wish my kids would behave that good. And I wish they were that happy. I wish they would could get along that well.
They are very balanced, inquisitive, seem very happy, well-mannered, obedient, caring. They certainly are very aware of other people's needs and go out of their way to try and help people in a way that is truly, I think, Christian. The younger children help each other. The older children help the younger children in a very pleasing ways that you often don't see in the culture at large.
When you study various alternative religions, you find that many of them are in crisis right now because their young teenagers that are growing up are leaving the group. And what I find remarkable about the family is that their children are staying in the group. The people who've been born into the family, raised in the family, are staying with it, and they have plenty of choices about leaving the group if they want to. I think that the family is the only alternative religion that's had a high success in retaining their children that I've studied closely.
I think the family teenagers compare with certainly the best of what we're turning out in mainstream society today. They are alert to what's going on in the world. They've been given a strong, loving environment within which to grow up in. They are aware, trained in terms of their formal education. They have had the benefit of living in a drug-free environment, and they've had the benefit of been given a fairly strong moral code, so that they have something to face life as an adult. I think one of the issues the family's dealing with right now is the first group of people have become adults. There's right now the first real crop of young adults in the family, and they are watching and waiting to see how these people are going to turn out, what is going to happen to them, what kind of choices are they going to make. I think as time moves on that we'll see that as a whole they make pretty good choices.